Hello there. My kids have been playing with the settings on my phone, and I'm too lazy to change them back. So today, your Bedtime Stories with Sean Arthur Cox, or as we like to call them here, awkwardly, BS with S.A.C, will be presented to you in sepia. Or black and white, I can't really tell. The lighting is weird in this room. Yep. Okay. Chapter 10. The Sixth Gate. Do you think it's safe yet? William's voice drifted in the darkness of the bottomless bag. Disembodied and omnipresent. With no sight to rely on, he found it easy to forget that his physical body even existed. The soft sway of the boat seeped into the almost textureless walls inside the bag, which made relying on the sense of touch for orientation nigh useless. Given enough time in the bag, a man could float on endlessly in the shadows and nothingness, the memory of the world outside slowly slipping away, until he ran out of air at least. "I don't know," replied the formless voice of Bloody John. "How long's it been?" "Hard to say," William said. "Time's sort of fuzzy in here." It was true. With no point of reference, the minutes blurred into hours, which disguised themselves as weeks, passing in the blink of an eye. William felt confident that it had been at least 5 minutes, but not yet a day. For that matter, he didn't even know what day it was. How long had he been in the bag before? Hours? Days? Longer? "I'm going to take a peek outside," William said. "See if it's even night anymore." He fumbled in the ink and shadow, not sure if he faced the proper direction or if he'd just been walking into a wall for the past few seconds. His arms flailed wildly like a marionette in the hands of a novice, but found no rope. Had it somehow slipped out the top, leaving them trapped in the void forever? William applied more method to his search, walking until he felt confident that he must have reached the edge, then took a step to the left, turned around, and walked again, arms stretched wide to the sides. After half an hour, or perhaps a few seconds, he found it, dangling down like a snake, waiting to catch its prey. William closed his fingers around its vine-like length, and followed it to the end, tying it off in a loop. "John," he called out in the darkness, "I need you to come here." "Where's here?" Bloody John asked in helpless confusion. "Just follow the sound of my voice," William said. "I'll keep talking, but I need you to come to me, or we could be stuck in here for quite a while." William began to tell Bloody John a tale of how he came to be aboard the Scalawag. He told of Barrow's End and the kobolds. He regaled him with the story of his 2-week run across the First Realm. He told of the Laughing Raven and Ollivander, of the storeroom and the bedroom. He laid out in detail the encounter with the wolves and the skeleton, and how he hid in the bottomless bag from what he assumed were bandits, but turned out to be Bloody John and his company. He recounted hiding in the bag, trapping the pirate, and his daring escape from the most feared vessel to ever touch the water. "That's a right rough story, kid," Bloody John said, close enough to touch. William blinked in surprise. Not that the gesture did any good in the all-consuming darkness of the bag. "How long have you been standing there?" he asked. "Since the magic bed," Bloody John answered. "Why didn't you tell me?" William asked, exasperated. "Why did you let me go on like that?" "You never said what you needed me over here for," John replied. "Besides, you sounded like you really needed to tell it." William hadn't thought about it before, but maybe he did need to tell it. He never gave Ollivander the whole story about what happened in the cemetery. He'd been too bitter at the time and clammed up, keeping it all in. It felt good to get it out, and not just because it helped him get the feelings of abandonment off his chest. Looking back, seeing what all he'd survived, he felt better, more capable. Not stronger or more powerful, but definitely more confident in his abilities to get out of tight spots. His journey had been terrifying, downright perilous even, but he made it through. He had stories of his own now, stories of adventure and overcoming great odds. At the age of 15, he'd already encountered and survived more than almost anyone he knew. He might not be chosen, but he might not even be a hero, but by the most technical of definitions, he was an adventurer. And that had to count for something. "So what'd you need me for?" Bloody John asked after a long pause. "Right," William said, pulled from his reverie of his experiences. "Hold this loop." "And that's going to help us?" John asked skeptically. "Well, it'll certainly help us find the exit faster. I don't know if you've noticed, Bloody John, but it's kind of dark in here. If we can't find the rope, our only means of escape, we're stuck. Ah, I hadn't thought of that. Bloody John pulled the rope through the loop, forming a self-tightening knot on his arm. That should keep, he said, beaming. We shouldn't have any trouble finding it in the future. William took a length of rope in his hands and tightened his grip, firm and strong. Then, one tired pull after another, he hoisted himself up. He peeked first. It was still night, presuming it was the same night. He couldn't see anything immediately present, no large looming shadows on the river, no torches or campfires or lanterns either. The only light came from the stars and full moon overhead, he guessed, based on their movements in the sky, that they'd been hiding for about an hour or so. Whatever ship they were hiding from had long since passed. William slid himself completely free of the bag and grabbed an oar. The boat had turned itself around in their time below, and he found it prudent to straighten her out for safety's sake. As he held the paddle like a rudder in the lazy water, Bloody John poked his head up cautiously, like a groundhog in the spring. "Is it safe?" he asked, a whisper on the wind. "It's safe, John. Come on up." Bloody John clambered out and took a seat. His head bobbed from side to side, scanning the countryside with trepidation. "Relax, Bloody John," William said, placating the pirate. "There's nothing to worry about. Just idle countryside, some trees, the water, and some picturesque mountains. It's like floating through a painting. Well, except for those storm clouds ahead. But we can take shelter in the bag." "Storm clouds, you say? And mountains?" John asked, tense. "Which mountains?" "I don't know," William shrugged. "I'm not from around here." Bloody John remained rigid, cautious. Worry etched lines into his brow, and his fist tightened around the oar. Blood drained away, leaving his hands white in the silvery light of the moon above. "Which mountains?" "I said I don't know," William sighed with frustration. "Sheesh, let me check." He slid the map from his belt and unfolded it in his lap. With a flick of his fingers, he zoomed in and panned over, searching for the name. He recognized the familiar curling scrawl of written script, but had difficulty making out the words in the darkness of night. Even with the moon beaming down, picking out subtle details like letters on a map posed some difficulty. "Morning Mountains? Mining Mountains? Something starting with an M," he said, scratching his head and squinting his eyes. "You don't think perhaps it says Moanin' Mountains, do ya?" Bloody John asked. His voice quivered and shook like a leaf in a storm. Yeah, it could be that," William replied, squinting harder, his face inches from the map and straining to see. There was the sound of wood against wood, a rustling of cloth, and then silence. William looked up to see the bottomless bag open and Bloody John gone. William stooped to all fours and crawled toward the bag, peering in. Down at the bottom, he could make out the vague outline of something moving in the darkness. "Everything all right, Bloody John?" he called down. "Don't suppose you see a cave on those mountains, do ya?" William peered into the shadows ahead of the boat at the stony peaks and cliffs. Drawing his eyes down the horizon, he examined where river and rock met. There did seem to be a darkish spot there. He supposed it could be a cave. "Maybe. What is it, Longshank's hideout?" "If only," Bloody John said, petrified with fear. "What is it?" William demanded. Anything that made a hardened pirate like Bloody John tremble with fear had to be bad news. "The sixth gate." William panicked. He'd never been through a water gate before, or at least not knowingly. He knew they were wild rivers, often 20 miles long or more, racing through caverns at breakneck speeds. They were notorious for deadly rapids and jagged crags jutting from the watery depths. Once upon a time, some bold explorers and engineers tried to make the gates safer by breaking down the stalagmites that broke waves and so often smashed ships. They'd hoped to ease the dangers of the rapids by eliminating anything that could wedge ships, trapping them in the gate at best, sinking them at worst. Unfortunately, in removing the dangerous current breakers, the rivers rushed faster, slamming ships into the cave walls at even the slightest of turns. Ever since, gate improvement programs limited themselves to installing ever-burning lanterns and cultivating bioluminescent molds and regular intervals along the walls, and on particularly large hazards along the gate's course. Regardless, for all their dangers, the water gates were infinitely safer than trying to navigate the mountains and the wall of storms. William steeled himself as best he could and prepared for the gaping maw in the mountains that readied itself to swallow him whole. "All right, Bloody John," he said, resolute. "You've navigated these things before. How do we do this?" "Do what?" asked Bloody John incredulously. "Get through the gates alive," William replied. "And as big and sturdy a boat as you can find?" the pirate bellowed from the safety of his hole below. Say, hypothetically, we only had a rowboat. What would you do? Wait for a passing ship to come by, slip on board, kill the captain and anyone else who thought they could take me, and then make 'em sail the gate for me? Not an option, John, William sighed loudly. What else have you got? Hide in a magic backpack and beg the sea gods for forgiveness for all the times I pissed over the side of the boat? You're useless, Stumpy. You know that, right? There came an unintelligible grumble from the bottom of the bag that may or may not have been agreement. Worthless. Just worthless, William grumbled back. It's not what your mum said last night. Really? William replied in disbelief. Now, we're moments from painful aquatic death, and you're still making crude remarks about my mother? It's my coping mechanism, the pirate confessed, shame tainting his voice. William made a mental list of things that could go wrong in the gate. Problem 1. The boat could flip. Possible solution, paddle very hard. A broader base would make the boat more stable, but it was a little late to do anything about the size of a rowboat now. Make some sort of counterbalance thing, which might or might not help the boat, make the boat more likely to flip. He'd come back to that problem later. Problem 2. The boat could get smashed. Possible solutions, reinforce the sides, except he had no metal, or tools, or time. Paddle very hard. Push off any incoming obstacles. His eyes widened, or rig up something that would automatically push him off of obstacles before anything could hit his small feeble craft. He could take anything long and lay a sort of lattice out from the center of the rowboat. Impacts would hit the protruding poles first, slowing him down, possibly avoiding altogether any unpleasant impacts against the boat itself. Plus, he could fashion something to add buoyancy. It would effectively broaden the base, preventing flippage. Inventory, William said to himself. What have I got? He looked around the small boat for anything that could be put to conceivable use. He had 2 oars, a bottomless bag, a magic lamp, a scimitar, a crutch, 2 sleeping bags, an endless wineskin, about 50 feet of rope, a twin bag, and a cowardly pirate. The oars and crutch could be lashed together and tied to the boat to provide impact bracers on the sides. There were a number of trees growing beside the World River. He could hack more branches free with the scimitar. They'd have the advantage of being fresh and maybe a little springy, providing extra protection. As the boat drifted past the numerous trees lining the riverbank, William swung his scimitar hard at low-hanging limbs, collecting them in the boat until he felt he had enough to suit his purposes. He considered using the rope to lash everything together, but feared he might need it later in case he needed to retreat inside the bag for safety. He could tear his clothes into strips. Just once he wanted to get out of one of these scrapes with some clothes in decent shape. He'd never heard tale of Ollivander or Logan the Huge spending half their travel stark nude. Maybe William was going about it all wrong. Or maybe when you were chosen, the gods showed more consideration for one's wardrobe. After all, emissaries of the divine couldn't go about looking like vagrants and vagabonds. William, however, was no one's emissary, and could therefore freely rend and tear his clothes as he pleased. How lucky. After discarding nearly everything he wore, he bound together his web of limbs and branches and laid it across the rim of the small craft. He had 2 poles jutting a couple of feet from each side, and a secured central square in which he sat. He wished he still had some barrels, something to provide a little extra flotation along the edge of his defensive barrier, but he'd have to make do with what he had. It wasn't like waterproof materials were easy to come by in the middle of nowhere. Then again, he did have those sleeping bags. Ollivander had mentioned that they were waterproof. Perhaps he could inflate them and use them as pontoons. How one inflated a sleeping bag, or sealed it for that matter, William had no clue, nor did he have much time to find out. He could hear the rush of water quicken. He could see the looming mouth of the cave growing wider with each passing moment. "John," he called down into the hole. Are we through yet? John asked, brimming with hope. "No," William said tersely. "I need those sleeping bags." "What for?" "Pontoons. Stabilize the boat. Don't suppose you know how to inflate a sleeping bag, do you?" Bloody John shook his head. "Well, now's your chance to figure it out." "Why me?" John asked. His arms crossed his chest, and he stomped his peg leg petulantly to the last. "I don't wanna." "Because as long as I'm the only one out here, actually on the boat, I'm the captain. Got it?" William barked down to him, making his best attempt at being gruff and commanding. "Yes, sir," Bloody John said, staring down at his feet like a child being told to milk the cows or go to his corner of the room. "Good. Now get me my pontoons before I do something really dirty to your mother, I guess." "Ravage, sir," Bloody John offered. "I said now!" John whipped into a frenzy of motion. It didn't seem to have any purpose other than to look busy, but it was more effort than the pirate had shown since he noticed the impending gate. William sat back and kicked up his feet the couple of inches available to him before hitting the oars and branches strapped across the rowlocks. Delegation was a fantastic thing. It felt good to be the captain, even if he was only the captain of the smallest vessel in the 12 realms, with only one crewman under him, and his vessel hurtled toward waters where expert sailors feared to tread under the best of conditions, with only the slightest hint of how boats actually worked, all under the assumption that his absurd notion about bound poles and inflated sleeping bags would somehow keep his tiny craft afloat. Thunder rumbled in the distance from the eternal wall of storms that blocked passage between the realms. He put his feet back down and peered his head into the bag. "How's it coming down there?" he asked, nervous. Heavy was the head that wore the crown. "Oh, fine," said Bloody John, who sat half in one bag, prodding at the inside of another with his arms. "What happened to your clothes?" "Sacrifices, John," he said, with an air of wisdom and authority. "Now how long on those bags?" "Can't say, Captain," Pirate replied. "Supposing I did blow 'em up, how do I go about sealing 'em off?" "Sacrifices, John," William repeated. "Sacrifices." And that's where we'll go ahead and stop this chapter. And we'll pick up next time as they go through that gate. Won't that be fun? Until next time, have good dreams.